with a brocha. I'm going to have you in mind. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'suk b'divrei Torah. Baruch na Adonai Eloheinu b'divrei Toratcha b'finu b'fi amcha beit Yisrael. V'niyeh anachnu v'tzetzenu v'tzetzei amcha beit Yisrael kulanu yodei shmecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai lomdei Torah l'mo Yisrael. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'chabad mikol amim v'natan lanu Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noteinu Torah.
Amen.
Okay, so we've got a very interesting section that's coming up. The first interesting section is something that Gavin mentioned weeks ago. Gav, you got good instincts. I think one or two of you also might have mentioned it. Is that do you have to pay necessarily with land? And what we actually have is we actually seem to pick up two contradicting verses here. And the verses that are contradicting is from a source material is obviously the one that's referring to Shine and Rego, as well as the one that's referring to Pit. So obviously the first thing that we mention is the one with Shine and Rego, which is Shmot chapter 22 verse 4. And how that actually works, it says, but it has been taught in a brisa. The verse states with regards to paying for the damage caused by a pit, he, the owner of the pit, shall return money. Okay? And then, I don't have to share it with you. I mean, I'm sure you saw on Shabbos where are the sources. We've been going through these sources for quite a while. So again, with Exodus Shmot, on a separate verse, chapter 22, verse 4, it states with regards to Shane and Rego, he shall pay his choicest field or his choicest vineyard. And when you say a choice field or choice vineyard, it means the best of the property that you have. So there seems to be a apparent contradiction. But before we hit this contradiction, what I wanted to do is just actually add a little bit more information than you read. You could turn around on first glance and say, well, something's wrong here, because why can't you have two different rules? On the one side, you could say with regard to pit damage, he can return money. And then with regard to Shine and Rego or an ox that's muad, as well as if you take a look at fire and you take a look at Maveh, meaning man, for muad, you can pay with the property. Maybe pit is just an exception. So what we actually come to realize is it's on Daf 5a, 3. There's a note that says 34. And what we did do is we said that there was a Gezeirah Shava. So, guys, do you remember what a Gezeirah Shava is? If you don't, you can ask me. It's not a problem.
What's a Gezeirah Shava?
Decree, okay. Something decree. Gezeirah is a decree.
A Gezeirah is a decree, and a Shava is an alignment of words, so to speak. Okay. So it's a decree. It's a halachic decree based on a certain array of words. So you have a hekesh. So I'm going to just go through what hekesh is first. I've said this to Michael and I've chatted that when you looked at the halachas of Shabbos, of the 39 prohibitions, it's right by the verse, by building of the Mishkan. So we know what activity was created in the Mishkan is what is prohibited on Shabbos, because the verses are not random. It doesn't go from one to the other without meaning. There's not always a hekesh. But in many cases, when we learned about Nassau, this week's Pasha, we saw that when it talked about a woman, a sota, versus a nazir, and it made the link with excessive drinking, lower inhibitions, etc. It's a hekesh. A Gezeirah Shava is somewhat different. A Gezeirah Shava is when it uses certain words exegetically. And what that means is that it puts them together in a way that it can't appear random. You can't have the word that or the word field or something broad. It has to be like pretty unusual combination of words, so the degree of appearance is minimal. Does that make sense? Because it's statistically almost improbable, if not impossible. So it's only a case where a certain alignment of words is going to create a connection. It's not a single word generally or a random bunch of words. This is according to the Rashba and the Rashash and Rashi, that in this particular case, that there's a hekesh. So what's the hekesh? There are 4 words that are used here, okay? And that is Nesina, Tachas, Kesef, and Yeshalem. And basically, these are used for all the damages, for all these particular avos to link them. So basically, the expression translated is Nesina means give. The first expression is tachas. So where you find when you damage an ox, you shall replace an ox in the place of an ox. In the place of is the word tachas, so that's linking goring. Nesicha giving, Yeshalem he shall pay, and kesef money. So when you're speaking of giving, it's actually tying together all the avos, and it's using words from each of them in a particular order to say that all the avos are tied together in terms of halacha, so that there's not a contradiction here. You don't only pay money for pit. You can pay money for the others, and in fact, if you don't have money for pit, you do pay from your superior property. Does that make sense? Okay. So I don't know if any of you guys did read about the Gezerah Shovel or not. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Just what you've told us. You've looked it up. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, what just you said? Money for pit. Just repeat that. I didn't.
No problem. So the verse for pit says, "He shall return money."
Okay.
He shall return money. So in other words, if the damager, if the creator of the pit has created a public hazard and a person's pit a person's ox falls into the pit, he shall return money in lieu of the damage of the ox.
Yes.
Okay? So the Gemara begins a lengthy discussion of the scope of the damages applications to pay of his best positions. So the first thing of it is a buyer poses a contradiction to Rabbah. It's written, he shall pay his choicest field or his choicest vineyard, which implies that payment of superior land is required. And payment of anything else is not acceptable. So that's in the case clearly of Shane and Regel. Okay. But then it's bringing a contradiction because in another brisa, the verse states with regards to paying for the damage caused by pit, he, the owner of the pit, shall return money, to include an article worth money, as it's an acceptable form of payment. And even something such as bran, the exposition taught in the brisa would seem to contradict the explicit statement made in the aforementioned verse. So I just want to add a bit of detail. Guys, can you mute your mic because I'm hearing a lot of static in background. I don't know where it's coming from. I'm sorry, guys. If you've got a question, you can unmute it. Okay? So, of the pit shall pay money to its owner. That's what the scripture could have written. Why does the phrase, he shall return, why is it mentioned? It's a superfluous statement. That makes sense, because what you could say, it says, the verse says with regards to the damage caused by a pit, he, the owner of the pit, shall return money to include worth. So, in other words, you can just say he pays money. Why do you use the word he shall return? So, he shall return, Rashi brings, is to say that if you don't have the cash equivalent, you can actually bring bran. And why does it even say something bran? Because bran is the most inferior commodity. What was bran used for? To feed horses. So we're finding a bit of a contradiction here. How can you go from superior property, which is the one extreme of the most expensive, to bran, which is the least expensive? So we're going to unpack this now. But there's one or two principles I want to give straight off the bat. The first thing of it is that when you create damage, the essence is to make sure that person can recover the financial loss. So if you don't have the cash flow to pay him in cash, then you have to pay for superior land. Why do you have to pay from superior land in this particular case for damage? So that the person can sell that superior land very quickly and convert it into cash. And why superior land? Well, very simple. If you've got a property in Santon and you get a couple of meters towards some property. Everybody loves property in Santon. Nobody's clamoring towards property in Bez Valley. So it has to be where the person that's damaged can convert it to cash very, very quickly, never mind which season it is. So it's a way that he can financially cover from the damages financial indent into his account. So why do we say then that you can pay with bran? Now, there is a case. What happens if the damager doesn't have any property? Are you going to say that the damager is not entitled to pay for the damage that he caused? Well, you've got to be practical there. You've got to say, listen, whatever the guy's got, he needs to pay with, but it's not a license to get away with everything, because an assessment is done of what that person is worth, etc., etc. But one of the things is that if he pays, for example, with bran, he has to pay with the breast bran that he particularly owns. So the whole idea here is that if he doesn't get paid in cash, he can turn over the land quickly. If he does get paid in cash, he's recovered from the damage of his property. If he gets paid in bran or any other commodity, what it means is he can convert it to cash, because land is not movable. So the reason why you pay from superior quality land, and the articles, there's a whole discussion whether the articles have to be superior or not. According to Rashi, it is. According to other opinions, it doesn't have to necessarily be superior, is that land is not movable. And because land is not movable, you need superior quality land in order to sell it quickly, where people will jump at the opportunity. Commodities are movable. So if you can't sell it in this city, you can sell it in another city. And don't think of a city like in our days. We've got a population of 7.6 billion. So when we talk about a city distance from Pretoria to Johannesburg is far. I mean, even going to four ways, you need a passport and to take a bit of sandwiches, because you can be stuck on the highway for an hour. But when you talked about a city in those days, the population in the 1950s was 3 billion people. In those times, it was a couple of hundred people. So a city is considered what we would consider as Ventersdorp, a tiny town, and there's a town next to it. So as long as you were paid with goods where you could convert it readily to cash, the Gemara was happy. They obviously wanted you to pay with the best commodity possible, and preferably with land where the person could recover. And the first price was, in fact, cash. Okay. Before we go on, all I wanted to say is when it uses the term shall return money instead of pays money, the word shall return is including an article worth money. That's what it's coming to bring. Okay. So before we go on, does everybody understand this? You can unmark for a second.
Yes.
Good.
Damon, I told you something very quickly.
Yeah.
Sorry. When I was reading this as well, so it wasn't clear. I'm sure this is the case, but I just want to double check it with you. It's a very simple question. When you recover from the top quality land of the damager, right? Do you only take your cut from that sale? You don't take the entire land, right?
You don't take the entire land. That's correct. It's an assessment that's done. That's correct.
We'll get the balance. So let's say the debt or the damage is like 50% value of the land. You sell the superior land because that's saleable quickly, whereby the inferior and the intermediate you won't sell so quickly. You sell it. Let's say it's worth, in today's terms, R1 million, and your debt is $500,000. The damager still keeps $500,000. And
you don't have, just to answer your question, you only get paid what is the value of what you owed in terms of land, and obviously you don't give him back the balance. He only gives you the value to recover your loss. It's very straightforward. Very straightforward. Okay, but we jump in the gun a bit, but it is straightforward. You only get paid the damage you caused, the damage you sustained.
You mean you can actually just take a section of the land that's equal to that value?
Yes.
Just sell that section as well?
Yes.
Okay, no, fine, just checking. All right, cool.
Perfect. Good question, actually.
I don't know if it is, but I
That's good. It's a straightforward question. It makes sense to me. Okay.
Yeah, straightforward. Yes, thank you.
I'm just hearing a lot of mark static. Let me just go on. Just mute your mic. Gav, sorry, man. There seems to be a technical issue. All right. So what we're also saying is there is an issue that's brought up as to why this is the case. Now, there's two different opinions. There's a buyer's opinion, and there's Ulla. So Ulla, the son of Rav Ulla, the son of Rav Ilayi, has a completely different distinction for this, because he actually says that it's there's no difficulty. What happens here is there's two different cases. If a person pays voluntarily for the damage, he is allowed to pay with other items, non-superior items. In other words, if he's got bran, he pays with bran. If he's got this, he pays with this. But when you try and play games with a person and they have to schlep you to court and they have to lose a lot of time and you're aggravating the court and you're wasting the court's time and you're wasting this guy's time, then you no longer have the benefit of paying with an article. Then you have to pay with superior quality land. Okay? And it's almost a penalty for trying to get cute with this guy when you know you owe the money. And support for this distinction is offered, and said Ulla, the son of Rav Ilayi, the distinction is indicated by the precise reading of the word, for it is written, he shall pay, which implies that he is being made to pay against his will. So whenever it uses the term, he shall pay his choicest field and his choicest vineyard, the term he shall pay means that at that point he is forced to pay, and therefore he has to pay from his superior quality land. And then he's using a separate term, and that term, it was, just hang on a second, shall be paid is implying that he's paying of his own volition. So firstly, we don't know what this means. All he's saying is that the biblical term, sorry about this, guys, I'm just trying to read the Aramaic, not that successfully. He shall pay his choicest field or his choicest vineyard. So the word he shall pay is implying that in that case the court is forcing him to pay. And when it's talking about he shall return money, it's talking about a case that's voluntary. Okay, so Rashi doesn't explain this particular expression, but the Rosh has an ingenious explanation. So what does the Rosh say? Do you remember, guys, when we learned there was a term, the law of the thief who pays double? Do you remember he had to pay the primary amount, which was the compensatory amount, and then the penalty, which was double? It was the compensation amount, and you times that by 2, and the second portion was the penalty force.
Yeah.
And it was in Shmot, in chapter 22, verse 3. So what term did they use there? Exactly the same. He shall pay double. And it's the same term that it says he shall pay his choicest field and his choicest vineyard. So that is when he's forced to pay by court. Do you remember what else we said with regards to a thief? What happened with a thief if he voluntarily said, guys, I did wrong, I don't want to take a false oath, and you don't have to drag me to court, nothing doing, I'm gonna pay what I took. Does he have to pay a penalty?
No.
No, he doesn't have to.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't. And this is exactly what the Rosh is coming to say. Whenever it uses the term he shall pay, it means the court has actually forced him at that point. And then all of a sudden you pay a penalty, or you pay your choicest field or your choicest vineyard. But when you actually come to the party, do the right thing and pay voluntarily, then at that point you're given a bit of a break. You can even pay with a commodity such as bran. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward.
It's
Fine.
straightforward.
Abaya doesn't like this, though. Abaya said to Ulla that he's not happy with the exact translation of the word, because he said you should use the word shall be paid is the term to be forced to pay against his will. Okay? And he wants to offer a completely different suggestion. Okay, so by the way, also the term he shall return indicates a voluntary payment, because we learn of a case of somebody that robbed an object and he didn't have witnesses testifying against him. What happens when I'm saying he shall return an object? It doesn't say the court shall return an object for a thief. What does it say? He, meaning the person, not that the court confiscated it or forced to extract money. And that's proving a voluntary payment. So that's obviously the source for the voluntary payment. But Rabbi Abaya said he's not happy with that, because he would use the word shall be paid. So what he's doing is he's bringing a case by Rabba, so by the master Rabba. Do you know who Rabba was to Abaya? Do you remember? Guys, do you remember who Rabba was to Abaya?
No, I'll be honest.
No.
I don't. I get confused.
Okay, So Rabba was Abaya's uncle, and it was his chief mentor.
Ah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, it was his uncle, and it was the person that taught him. It was his chief mentor. So he often quotes, whenever you hear Abaya, he respects Rabba to the extent he calls him the master, and he often brings him to explain some difficulties. Okay? So he said, listen, he doesn't like this contradiction, and he wants to bring an example by his master Rabba. So now it goes off on a bit of a tangent, but we're going to see what it's actually talking about here. So it was taught in a brisa, if a person possesses houses, fields, and vineyards worth 200 zuz, we would normally render that person ineligible to take part of Maisa Ani. So let me just explain to you what this Maisa Ani is. Let me just give you a bit of a background. On the 3rd and the 6th year of the 7-year Shemitah cycle, you would take your produce, you would take a tithe of one's produce and give it to the poor. Now, every year you would give it to the Levi, okay? But on the 3rd and the 6th year, you would give your tithe to the poor, okay? Now, it's not that the poor did without during that other period, but you needed time for your crop to regrow, etc. And they would distribute it correctly. Don't feel that the poor weren't taken care of at other times. But at these particular times, you could actually go for quite big loans if you were a poor person. Okay. Now, the thing of it is there was a cut-off point. What is determined as a poor person? There's two different definitions in the Gemara. What's the one definition? And this is beautiful for today, is that if a person is not meeting their expenses, they're considered poor. In other words, even if a guy's pulling in 50 grand a month, but it's expensive with school fees at King David and Discovery Medical Aid is 60 grand, and every month he's getting in the hole, would you consider him a wealthy person?
No.
No.
No, he's in trouble.
He's sinking. It's just a matter of time. It's the difference between getting hit by a bus or dying of cancer. It's going to knock you out. It's just one is quick and one is slow. So they're saying if somebody doesn't have a job, that is a thing of poverty. But we mustn't forget that just because somebody has a house and they look okay, it doesn't mean they are okay. So that's the one definition. The other definition is to be eligible for this Maisa Ani. If you had 200 zuz, you were considered not eligible because that meant that you had buffer and sustainable income. So if you had 199 zuz, you were eligible. You were actually eligible. How this would work in principle, I don't know, because I would think that somebody quickly blows a certain portion of their money. But I think, as far as I knew, that the Maisa Oni would have to be on the property value, so that you can't go from a certain financial level and then quickly dip under to take the charity. Your property was valued at a certain level. Does that make sense? So if your property was worth 200 zuz, you weren't eligible. If it was worth 199, you were eligible to receive even 1,000 zuz worth of Maaseh Ani, as long as you receive it at one single time. And then at that point, you may no longer take any Maaseh Ani until you consume a portion of your own assets and your total worth again dips below the 200 ceiling. Obviously, they have an assessment rule. If a person's an habitual spender and they're taking advantage, they're not going to allow that. But these are the rules in general. Does that make sense? So again, bottom line, you can get up to 1,000 zuz of Maisa Ani at one time if you dip below 200. All right. One thing that you've got to note is that when it says in the Gemara that a person possesses houses, fields, and vineyards worth 200 zuz, the person is not entitled to sell their own home, by the way. This only applies to houses other than his personal residence. He's not required to sell his own home before taking Maisa Ani. This is from Tosfot. Okay. And he can sell the rest in order to obtain food, etc. So I've given you a bit of a background. Rashi is going to talk about two interpretations of what the Master Rabbah was talking about. The one is on this, and the one is on 7b. At the moment, we're entering 7a3. We just finished 7a2. Okay? Let me just, so he said if it's worth 200, he's ineligible to partake of Ma'aser Ani. Okay, but if he is unable to find buyers to which to sell them, we feed him Ma'aser Ani up until half the worth of his fields. If his fields are worth 200 zuz, he may receive up to 100 zuz worth of Ma'aser Ani. And the master posed a question regarding this law. What were the circumstances of the case? What was the reason that the person was unable to sell his properties? So it proposes two reasons, guys. It says if everybody's land has declined in price and his land has declined along with them, we should be able to provide him with even Ma'aser Ani than half the present worth of his properties. For everybody's land has declined. So what it's saying is as follows. Marco?
Sorry, Dan. Sorry, but if everyone's declined relative to each other, then, aren't they're the same standard of living now? Doesn't matter. I mean, it's not that he's poorer. If don't you consider the fact that everybody is, the level where everybody is? My question.
It's a good question. So this is exactly what it's saying. So if everybody's land is declared, that for sure that person's a bona fide poor person. Anybody may take Ma'aser Ani. In other words, if the whole community's land has dropped in price, there's not even a question there, Michael. You give each of those people Ma'aser Ani. That's a clear case where they're eligible. Where there's a case where you're not really eligible is where everybody else's land has retained its value, and this one guy's land won't retain its value. Let me tell you why. Okay. Say somebody's about to make aliyah, right? And they're in a hurry to leave because the container's 120 grand to take to Israel. So they're not going to fit everything in the container, and they're selling a house worth of goods. If people in the community know he's leaving, sometimes they wait until the last second to make sure they can get a real good discount and deal on the stuff that he's selling, because he has to leave at a certain point. So you often see on the JJCF that he's selling his car urgently. He needs to sell it at a great price because he's leaving for Israel and his plane's leaving. Okay, so what's happening is the value of his land is declining because he's in a panicky state. Again, he doesn't have food, he doesn't have with which to cover his expenses, and he's panicking. He needs to actually cope and sell the land in order to recover costs to survive. Okay, so this is a question because his land there is actually worth 200 zuz, or maybe 250 or 300 zuz. So he's not classified as a poor person. The only reason that he'd now be classified as a poor person is he might sell it at 150 zuz, right? Because he's desperate. So he's not getting the true value of his property. So we're saying, is this a case where this person is eligible for Ma'aser Ani? And there's a compromise reached in the Gemara, which we'll hit next session, which means we'll supply him this shortfall of up to 200 zuz. So he doesn't have to sell immediately in the bad season, where the land is not worth its real value. Do you get what I'm saying? But in a case where everybody's land has declined in value and people are suffering, they are bona fide poor people. And they can take as much Ma'aser Ani as they're eligible for. And that's not half a person's property. That can be up to 1,000 zuz if the court deems that they need it. So that's a clear case. Because why? The land is worth less than 200 zuz. Doesn't matter if it happens to everybody. They'll help each and every person that they can. That person is not going to come out. This is a case where a person's property is over 200 zuz, so he's technically not eligible. The only reason that we're prepared to say maybe there's extenuating circumstances is he's going to do himself a bad turn by selling his property out of season. Am I making sense, guys?
Perfect.
Yeah.
100%. I just want to ask you something, Damon.
Yes.
In the bad season, I can't remember what month that is.
That's Tishrei.
Tishrei. In Tishrei, when everybody's property goes down, not everybody's eligible for Ma'aser. It's only the ones where their property goes below 200.
Not at all. Not at all. And this is exactly what we're saying. This is what you guys have missed from the revision.
If you tell him somebody's property is normally 1,000 and it drops down to 800, they're eligible.
So there is an opinion, yes. In other words, I don't want to deal with it in this session. There's not enough time, but there are certain cases where um, I don't want to get into it in this session. It's going to complicate it.
It's fine. Cover it some other time. As long as it gets covered, I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. So listen, let's just keep the case clear. This is a straightforward case, and that case is anybody that's land is dipped below 200 is eligible for Maisa Ani. It doesn't matter if everybody's taken a hit. It's almost like, think of it like COVID, right? Is that the government, I'm not talking in our barbaric country, I'm talking in a first world country like the Israeli government, where it helps its citizens during the shortfall. Not one person has suffered, the whole country has suffered, the whole world suffered. And then the government is giving food packages, eligibility packages, etc. Doesn't matter if there are a lot of people, because they're all suffering. And in Tishrei, when all their property goes below 200 zuz, they are now eligible. There's no question. This is a case where it's just, again, one person during the peak season, his property would be worth 200, but he has to sell it in the bad season because he's panicky. He can't wait to the good season. That's the issue. It's not that it's not worth 200 zuz in the good season. It's that now it's not worth 200 zuz in the bad season, so we don't want to see him take a hit. So this is proving one thing before we end, that the assessment of land is taken in the good season, not in the bad season, of what the land is truly valued for. I just want to end on one sentence, and it's the equivalent to what is the worth of a jersey? It's not what it's selling for in summer months on special. It's what it's worth in winter when you need it. That's a true value of what a jersey is worth. It's not on the sales season when everybody's schwitzing. That's not the true worth of a jersey. It's during its season when its appropriate function is being used. That's the worth of a jersey. It's the same thing with the property. It's not when the property dips at its true worth. And we would think that the worth is whatever it's valued at now. And this Gemara is coming to prove that the worth is according to what it is in its peak season. That's why it's bringing this example. I'm just giving you a bit of a heads up.
All right, good.
And we're going to say, why is this relevant? And it's going to become relevant because when we go back to damages, we're going to say, well, listen, do you pay during the peak season of what the property is worth or the off-season? And that's why they're bringing this example of a Maisa Ani. It's not going off on a tangent for no reason. It's saying, well, what is the worth of the value of a property? What it's worth now? Or do we assess it on the peak season value? Do you get what I'm saying? All right, guys, we'll end off on this term. And how much time do we have, mate?
1 minute, exactly.
1 minute.
All right, guys, have a wonderful day.
Okay. Thanks, mate.
Cheers.
Ciao.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Thanks.